and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we're going to talk about the element of water. So the last couple episodes, we've been talking about Earth, and that's the first half of the Earth-water polarity, with obviously water being the second. And these two signs kind of operate in a very, they balance each other out very well and deal with very opposite things. Obviously very similar to the fire and air signs in that they're a polarity, but I tend to find the water-earth polarity is a bit more obvious in terms of its how it kind of fits together. And that might just have to do with the fact that Earth is extremely obvious in what it represents. But so we're going to talk about water today. And so we're going to take the same approach we have been doing. We're going to look at what can we infer astrologically from the reality of just real water, right? So let's think about this. Well, the first and very most obvious thing is water is a fluid. And there's a couple things that are going to stem from that. Number one, it means it's formless. It doesn't have a shape. It kind of fits the shape of whatever container it's in. And if it does not have a container, water just scatters. And there's actually a directional component to that, because it will scatter, but it will also ultimately move in a downward direction. What do I mean? Obviously, we live on Earth. We have gravity. And so water is going to flow in the direction gravity takes it. So it's always going to want to flow downhill. And so with that, there's a certain level of depth that water is always trying to kind of get to. And then we'll come back to that idea of depth because we see it in another way as well. But water scatters, it's fluid, and it's formless. So it's kind of the first quality, is this quality of formlessness. Second thing is water changes really easy. And there's two sides to this. Number one, obviously, if we think of it from the formless aspect, you can change the shape of it very, very easily because you could just pour it into a different container, right? You have a bowl, now you have a cup, now you have a kind of a box, tray, or whatever, right? If you keep pouring it into different things, it's going to the shape of it's going to be different in each thing. But even more than that, if we look at other elements, for example, as opposed to water, like a rock. Rocks don't change form unless you either break them down, into smaller pieces, but even then it's still the chemical composition of a rock, or until you heat it to extreme temperatures. Gases don't kind of become liquid until you freeze them down to extreme temperatures. So most things on the Earth actually are pretty much going to be set as either a solid or a gas. It's very rare to find things that are liquid. And water is the lone exception, or one of the lone exceptions, right? And that it's naturally a liquid. But even more so than that, water has a really low boiling point and a very high freezing point relative to other chemical things. And so it's capable of freezing into ice, becoming a solid, or evaporating into water vapor at pretty normal levels that we would see on the Earth. And so because of that, water can change its state, change its kind of temperament really quick relative to all other things, right? Rocks you got to heat rocks up. So that's kind of the change I'm more talking about. Obviously changing shape to fit its container, but that's more has to do with its lack of form. All right. So then the next thing is water has this ability to saturate. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have, let's say you go get a bucket and you fill it with dirt, right? Dirt's dry. It's doesn't have any water in it. Right, it's just hard, crusty earth. If you pour water in there, you get mud, and it saturates it. And there's a certain level where, first it kind of starts to get moist, right? And then as you pour more and more and more water, it will slowly kind of overwhelm it, and you get this kind of soupy very easy to move mixture, right? It makes it much more fluid-like, even if it's not in composition totally a fluid. But you saturate the earth, and suddenly it's different characteristics. In the same way, if you have air, right? What happens when you have a lot of water in the air? It's humidity, right? It feels gross once it gets to extreme levels. And that's the nature of water. It has this ability to saturate things, right? And too much water, obviously things drown because you get a lake, an ocean, whatever, and if you're not a swimmer, yeah, that's bad news. So too much water can be oppressive, but it has this characteristic where it can kind of saturate things and make them cool, make them pleasant and comfortable. When the air is actually extremely dry, like somewhere, I live in California, United States. If you go inland California a little bit, it's very dry. The Mountain West, generally very dry. Southeast or Southwest, very dry. And when you have that really dry weather, on the one hand, some people say dry heat's a little nicer than humidity. That might be true. But man, you don't drink water, you're parched quick, and it can be pretty awful. But water can alleviate that, right? And we can add some humidity, and it's actually a much more pleasant, much more comfortable air feeling, right? Much more comfortable atmosphere to be in. So water saturates things. And then I think the last two things are a little bit more minor, but water has an ability to cleanse, right? We talked about with fire. Fire has the ability to cleanse things via kind of purging it, right? It burns away, melts away the impurities. With water, it's more of an external wash in a lot of ways. It's not as I'm going to, purge away this thing to its, true self. It's more of I'm going to just wash away the filth off of it, kind of a thing. Right? So water has an ability to kind of cleanse as part of its nature. But it's not kind of a primary function we'd use it for, but it is an important function for sure. And then the other aspect is if we look at, say, the ocean, right? Some of the things we'll notice about the ocean, because the ocean is what? It's just a giant body of water. It's water in large quantities. Ocean has a rhythm to it, right? We call them waves and currents. The tides, right? There's a kind of a rhythmic element to it. And so water, the element, has a rhythmic quality to it. If we look at it in a chart, and we'll talk about this in the next episode, but the sign of Cancer is in the water signs, right? And Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon is very rhythmic. And so water signs and water elements have this rhythmic quality to them. And again, I'll cover this in a moment. So those are kind of the main things, right? Formlessness, easy to change, kind of a flow. Oh, and depth. That's the one I wanted to come back to. Again, if we look at the ocean, right? The ocean is extremely deep. We actually know less, supposedly. I mean, this is what they'll say. I don't know. This might be a meme way of saying it. But supposedly we know less about the ocean, the bottom of the ocean, than we do about space. And it's because it's extremely hard to get down there, right? The extreme depths of the ocean are really crazy, intense places where we really can't get to. And so that's kind of one of the things there. And one other aspect, too, is as a result of kind of depth, right? The more water you have, the more opaque and hard to see through it becomes. We can kind of see through it when it's shallow. Shallow water is pretty clear, especially if you don't have a lot of mud or algae or things like that. But the further down you go, right, the deeper the water gets, the more opaque, the more difficult it becomes to see until it eventually becomes too dark, too difficult, and you can no longer see anything. And so one of the qualities of water then is the water signs is they're going to have this opaqueness to them, this lack of clarity. So what does this all mean astrologically then? Well, let's cover this one by one. So the first thing, water elements are formless, right? What does that mean? Well, if the earth signs have form, they have substance, they represent things that are real. If we're looking at signs that are formless, that means we're looking at things that aren't real, right? We're talking about or dealing in a plane of existence that does not deal with the real substantive world. Instead, it deals with I don't want to call it the non-real, but it deals with the imaginary or the unseen world. So what does this mean? It's going to represent things like emotions, right? Psychology, wisdom, understanding. Another aspect is connection, and that has to do with that saturation quality. The water signs deal with the parts of life that are not seen, but that we still have. So like I said, emotions, love, connection, spirituality, right? The spirit world, our psychological ability and our ability to kind of tap into things that are not clear, not understandable, right? This idea of depth that I mentioned a second ago this is part of why we can tap into so many weird things when we look at the water signs, is because there's this extreme depth to them that we don't fully understand, just like we don't fully understand the ocean, what's going on down there, right? Because the atmosphere for it is too difficult. It's too hard to get to in order to understand clearly. And so that's part of the dynamic of the water signs, is that they're so deep, that water itself is so deep, it's hard to fully grasp it, right? And so the water signs deal with these unclear things in life, right? Spirituality, emotions, subconscious. Another thing is the water signs, as I said, they because of their formlessness, they tend to become the container, or kind of change shape based on the container they're in. And so what that means is the water signs all have certain defense mechanisms where they will imitate. And this has to do with them having Pisces in the chart, but they all imitate in some way the kind of surroundings that they have. They tend to pick up on things in their surroundings, some more than others. For sure, Pisces is probably we see this the most. But the water signs pick up things from their surroundings and become those things. And so the water signs really want containers. They'll often adapt and become whatever they're around in terms of the reality. So if you put the water signs in a really harsh setting, they tend to pick up on that on a subconscious level, and they kind of feel that emotion of it. And it really warps them and affects them. So the water signs all kind of have this quality of being able to pick up on the world around them, being able to kind of become the things around them in certain aspects. Additionally, in terms of change, right, we said water can change its state very quickly. This is something, too, we see with emotions, right? Emotions change on the fly. They can change very rapidly, right? And the water signs, more than any other sign, have an ability to change their feelings, change their emotions, and kind of really tap into it and understand their emotions really, really well, and they will kind of change rapidly as a result of that. So you can expect that the water signs, more than the other signs, are going to have a very changeable quality to them, where they can... The fire signs like Aries, for example, or Sagittarius, are kind of known for their very quick temperament, right? They can change and go from 0 to 60 in many ways, but that's more driven by desires, by things they're kind of trying to act on. Whereas with the water signs, it's much more of an emotional component, a feeling component, where they feel very much a certain way very quickly, and that feeling can change, and they don't tend to hold on to it nearly as long. As far as the kind of flow, the fluidity, they want to flow downhill. What does this mean? Well, it goes back to the idea of depth, right? The water signs understand people, and they deal with depth, and they understand things because when you get depth of something, you get a deep, intimate understanding of it. And so the water signs are very intimate, and they're very deep people, very deep thinkers, very deep signs. They want to go to the depths of things. So wherever water is in a chart, it's typically wanting to go as deep as possible. Like, for instance, you get a water sign in a particular Scorpio really likes to intentionally dive deep. The other ones kind of do it more passively. But if you got, say, Scorpio in the 10th house, right, this is somebody who's going to have a really deep connection to their career, right? And so that's kind of the nature of the water signs. They have this depth. They're always trying to go to the deepest point, right? They're trying to get to the bottom of things. And they all do it differently and each in their own ways and kind of apply it towards different things. But that's the nature of them. Now, what about this idea of saturation, right? The water signs saturate things. That means they connect with things, right? If you think of, again, going to the example of dirt in a bucket, if we add water, the quality changes, right? We now have water kind of carrying the earth. It's become mixed in, and so they're kind of indistinguishable. And this is what water does. It kind of merges into things, right? The earth will absorb it, the air will absorb it, and it kind of becomes this one thing that moves together. So water has this ability, the water signs have this ability to kind of merge into things, merge into other people, and kind of blend and saturate them. And obviously, if you have too much water, right, too much emotion, that can cause problems, right? If we're super hyper emotional about everything, we're going to be all over the place. And so that's one of the aspects. You want to oversaturate. When you're watering your plants, you put too much water in, what happens? You flood it, right? And so you try and avoid that. You just want just the right amount of water. And that's one of the things that water signs will tend to struggle with, is they tend to oversaturate at times. Apply too much emotion, too much depth to something when it's not needed. Now, as far as cleansing goes, the water signs can cleanse things, right? This has to deal with I don't want to say it's kind of, like, it kind of sounds cheesy, but the idea of, like, how do I want to put this? If somebody's struggling with something, right, we could take the kind of earth approach to help them and say, oh, hey, let me physically help you with this thing. And that might solve their problem, maybe it won't, but maybe even if it does, maybe it's something that they're still very wounded about, right, emotionally. Something that was very emotionally damaging. And that's where the water signs come in. They have this ability to kind of cleanse a lot of that hurt, cleanse a lot of those wounds, because they deal with stuff on that level. And so they can wash away a lot of the difficult aspects of us. Because water is deep, right, it gives us intense understanding of things. And when you understand things, you know how to move past them, move around them. And that's part of that cleansing process. If we think about it from a therapeutic standpoint, a big part of therapy is you learning what it is that I've got going on, why it is that I have going on, and how it's working, so that I can then learn to operate and rewrite some of that stuff. It's therapy is a very, very watery type of approach, because it's dealing on that level of being able to kind of understand it, and now we cleanse it. And so water has this approach to cleanse the kind of the impurity a little bit. It's not like fire where it burns it down to its base kind of thing, but water's a little bit more soft in its touch. One of the major aspects of water, if we think of the ocean again, right, we have this rhythmicness to them, and that's because emotions tend to come and go, right? We don't just feel the same emotion all the time every day, right? They're not constant. They're always changing. And so, but they kind of go in a rhythm, all right? But another aspect of the ocean is, if you're just in the ocean, you don't have dry land, you're just floating along on the waves. And so this is one of the tricky aspects for the water signs, is they can become very detached, because they have this feeling of, I'm just floating in the ocean with no sense of where reality is. Right? If you've ever been underwater and kind of just let yourself float there, like in a pool or something, or even if the beach or in a lake or whatever, you you get that feeling of I'm just kind of floating in the void, it almost feels like. No sense of which way's up, which way's down, which way I'm going. And that's what happens when you immerse yourself in too much water. And so this is one of the big dangers for the water signs, is they can become very, very detached and lose sight of what reality is. And so that's one of the things that the water signs really need to make sure, that they don't become this ocean of emotion, ocean of depth, ocean of spirituality, whatever it is that is their thing, that they totally lose sight of what is going on in the real world. And so that's water, generally speaking. The water signs are very sensitive because they deal with stuff that's not really physically real. And it can make them seem kooky at times if they get lost in it, like I said. But the water signs are very sensitive, very delicate, but they're also very healing, right? They have that kind of cleansing property, purifying property that's more of a, let me wash away the filth rather than purge it down. So that's water. Next week we'll look at water, or next episode I should say, we'll look at water through, we'll look at it from the aspect of the houses. And then we'll also see what happens when you have too much or too little water in your chart. And then we'll go from there. So I think that's it for today. Thank you for listening.